Domination is a PvP game mode in Cosmo Tier where you can control a fleet of ships to capture points. The more points you have, the greater your income, allowing you to build even more ships. The goal of the game is to capture all the points on the map or have the most points as the timer runs out. If there are equal points for both sides, the first to capture a new position wins. Since you have to control a decent amount of units, this game mode has some similarities with RTSs like StarCraft. You do not need to worry about production or supply chains, but the amount of micromanagement needed to control several individual ships at once makes up for that. Ships you want to use are best designed in creative mode beforehand. There are a few groups of ships that every player should have in their library, which I will explain now. Heavy attack crafts are meant to tank and dish out tons of damage. You can use them to capture and hold points and to challenge anything that enters their range. Frequently used weapons are deck cannons, nukes, and deck cannons and nukes. But the most classical ship still is the standard 2-deck cannon ship, which is a staple among the top players, having good attack, defense, and still being fairly cheap. If there are heavy attack crafts, there are also obviously going to be light attack crafts. Those are used to quickly capture points, flank enemy ships, and take out vulnerable targets. They provide map control, but are also a bit trickier to use because they often lose in head-on fights against more expensive enemies. Large cannons are very convenient here as they deal high damage to internals, and they often provide a surprisingly high health pool that gives ships with this limited amount of armor at least some survivability. Then we have kites. They want to stay at range, slowly killing enemy ships and accumulating value. They like to use the energy weapons for high sustained damage. Last up we have support ships, which can take various forms. EMP ships, for example, are excellent as disabling enemy ships and giving allies an opportunity to punish some paralyzed crafts. Nuke sticks can also be very useful. They are cheap and deal a ton of damage in a single volley, making them excellent at dealing with heavily armored opponents. It is important to keep in mind that not every good ship fits one of these narrow categories though. Avoiders, for example, kind of behave similar to kites, but they are not because they can dodge to the sides and they are even tanky enough to take some heavy punishment from the front. Now for some design philosophies of domination ships. Just like in the other PvP modes, it is crucial to fully utilize your reactors and control rooms. This goes so far that some domination ships don't even use any reactors and just go off of capacitors. Such ships are called wastes, and they allow for flanking and swarming strategies because of their incredibly low cost. Also because of the chaotic battlefield in this game mode, where ships constantly try to flank you. Having good back protection is important, especially for more expensive ships. Making a box in your thrusters can work, but is very expensive and makes your ship heavier. That's why cheaper ships instead separate their thrusters and put armor pillars in between them. This gives very nice cost effectiveness. Next, you should think about the appropriate attack defaults for your ships. For kites, you often want to save an attack default at maximum range. For other ships, you mostly want to set a ramming attack default. There, you can use so-called auto-ram. This is an exploit that allows one to set a negative attack distance, making your ship ram the target. To set such an attack default, build a long structure line, set it to pirate faction, set an attack default, hold shift, and drag the command to the center of the line and save the attack default. If you already have a ship with the attack default, you can just import it by loading it over the current design while ticking load attack default and then just cancelling the change. Auto-ram is used by all top players as it makes controlling your fleet much more convenient. At the very end, one should also set some part groups. Domination is very micromanagement extensive, which makes it even more crucial than in other PvP modes to have hotkeys for everything. Weapon groups are always useful as fire can be held when one wants to preserve ammo or weapon cooldown, for example. Especially on heavier ships, you can also bind your thrust for both turning directions. This allows you to spread damage when fighting kites, which you cannot chase down anyways. Other useful hotkeys you should look into are the boost toggle, entering build mode and repairing the ship, entering direct control mode. Sometimes you just want that extra control over your own ships. Using direct control in combination with phased cursor and some good piloting skills can turn your normally vulnerable interceptors into deadly demons that counter pretty much anything without a decent amount of armor. Cancelling weapon targets, cause with nuke sticks you want to set the nukes to fire at target. That way they only fire once you set a target and don't waste ammo. Resetting that target may be needed if you suddenly have the wrong angle to fire, for example. Restocking resources. I recommend even binding this to right mouse click so that you can automatically restock any ally chips you send out of the spawn zone. Inverting collision avoidance. Regarding that last point, I recommend you play with collision avoidance on by default to avoid ramming asteroids. To avoid situations like this, you should use the aforementioned toggle if you do not care about crashing into enemies. One last thing you should do is find a good way to target enemy parts. If you do not target your ship's weapons, they will lose a great deal of efficiency, but clicking on the enemy ship can be hard in an intense battle. For that reason, I recommend using picture-in-picture and set it to always display the enemy ship. That way you can quickly click on the enemy and right-click their part in the top right corner. If you need the default rules used for 1 versus 1 fights and domination, you can see them here. And there will also be a document linked in the description with the default tournament rules. If you intend to play with more players, you just double all of the credit counts. For the last topic, I quickly want to explain two strategical concepts. The most fundamental strategy is watching what your enemy does and spawning appropriate ships to counter them. For example, EMP ships are great at dealing with wastes as they can siphon all of their energy, effectively killing them. Kites are great at dealing with anything slower than them, but are vulnerable to fast ships and EMP hits. Fast ships are too vulnerable to challenge their heavier opponents. Second is something a bit more abstract: value and tempo. Value is the potential advantages that your ship can provide for the duration of the game. Tempo is the power they can provide right now. A kite, for example, provides very high value because it can kill a bunch of enemy ships without taking any damage, but it is low tempo because it takes very long to do so. A kite cannot capture a point that is occupied by an enemy or it will meet a quick demise. How is that useful? Well, there are a few guiding rules. When you are behind in the game, for example, you want high tempo to prevent the opponent from winning immediately. If you instead go for value and spawn a kite, you will not be able to contest points and prevent them from being captured. If you are ahead, you can either go for high tempo to quickly close out the game, or high value to grow your advantage into the late game. If there is not much game time left, you should also use high tempo picks like some kind of brawler, for example. A kite is not going to be able to accumulate much value with under 1 minute left. With that, you got a comprehensive introduction to domination and even learned a bit about the meta. But be aware, that domination is all about your micro and ship building, so don't slack off and play some games.